There will be a discussion in the end, no?
Yes, ma'am.
I've
Yes,
timed
ma'am.
it for about an hour.
Yeah. And then we can have 20 to 30 minutes of discussion, ma'am.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So now we are live on YouTube also, ma'am. I start with the today's proceeding, if you permit me.
Yes, please.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. Uh, a warm good morning to one and all present here. It's our proud privilege that we are on the penultimate day of our national workshop on research methodology, jointly organized in collaboration with Indira Gandhi National Open University Regional Center, Noida, and Department of Sociology, NAS College, Meerut. It's our pleasure that we have amongst us as today's expert speaker, Professor V. Sujatha ji, Center for Study of Social Systems, School of Social Sciences, Jawaharlal Nehru University. I actually had listened to ma'am somewhere around 12 years down the line when I attended a refresher course in sociology in the Center for Study of Social Systems, where where ma'am was coordinator with the other colleagues. Now, I request Dr. Ashok Kumar, who is lecturer, Department of Education, State Council of Education Research and Training, Delhi, who is also a participant of this workshop and playing the role of a reporter today, to please present a brief profile of Professor V. Sujatha for all of us.
Yes. Good morning to one and all. I feel immense pleasure to introduce Professor V. Sujatha, an expert of today's session. Professor V. Sujatha is a professor at the Center for the Study of Social Systems, School of Social Sciences, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. If I talk about the research projects, so her research projects in 2015 to 17, lead collaborator in the ICCSR India and IHSS South Africa. Joint research project with the University of Cape Town on the antinomies of public health and economic growth. Member Transdisciplinary Research Cluster TRC, Jawaharlal Nehru University on pluralist healthcare, knowledge, technology, and practice, and consultant on the Government of India position paper on national instruments and measure for protection of health related traditional knowledge, HRTK, proposed by the Ministry of Ayush for World Intellectual Property Organization negotiation, WIPO, 2016 to 17 in collaboration with TRC, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. In 2009-10, UGC DART Triple-P program on epistemological pluralism and bilateralism, Ayurveda in a globalizing world in collaboration with the University of Freiburg, Germany from 2009. If I talk about academic positions, honorary academic position, coordinator global studies program, School of School System, Social Sciences, Center for the Study of Social Systems, JNU since 2013. Member Academic Council, Madras Institute of Development Studies, Chennai since 2015. Special invitee, Inter-Academic Panel on Women in Science of the National Academy of Sciences, India, NASI from 2015. Professor V. Sujatha visited various universities as a visiting professor. Visiting professor at the first Global Week organized by the University of Pompeii, Fabra, Barcelona between 20 to 28 February 2017. Visiting professor at the Department of Sociology, Mumbai University, February 2017. Modern European thoughts and its critique at the Institute for Sociology, University, Freiburg, Germany, May to July 2009. She has also authored many books. Her recent publications are Sociology of Health and Medicine, New Perspectives, Oxford University Press, New Delhi in 2014. Health by People, Sociology of Medical Law, Rabat Publication, Jaipur 2003. Globalization of South Asian Medicine, Knowledge, Power, Structure and Sustainability in 2020. She has also authored many research papers, some of them with keywords: nutrition and environment in the era of public health, beyond medical pluralism, is food a numerical value, or is food natural or cultural? So I am very proud to welcome such an eminent and distinguished expert on behalf of Indira Gandhi Open University, Regional Center, Noida, and NAS College, Meerut, convener of the program, Dr. Sanjeev Mahajan, and all the participants of the program. Welcome, ma'am. Welcome.
Yeah. So Dr. Saklani and Dr. Sanjeev Mahajan, I'm happy to share my thoughts in this session on research methodology workshop. So thank you for a generous introduction. I just wanted to say among the positions, I'm the Academic Council membership and Global Studies program was 2 years. It's over. I don't hold those positions. So today, the topic on which I will be speaking, should I start? I can't hear you.
Please, ma'am, please. Yes, you can.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the topic on which I would be speaking is the significance of research questions and research design in any research endeavor. I know you've been through about 7-8 days of the workshop, but the importance of research question is always has to be highlighted and especially brought forward. So the what I wanted to, something that we are all experiencing today and seeing around us is this what is known as the data fetish. You have an explosion of data, the new tools, so much of data is put in front of us. So much is coming out in the media, in social media, more and more new tools is there. So many numbers and averages are coming out. And this is no other time that it's true than this time of the COVID crisis, that the sheer amount of information and data that's coming out is large. It's coming from various sources. Also, you find interestingly that there's a visualization of data. You see very colorful curves and polygraphs. You see interactive boards in every news channel. And what is also interesting is that it's not just experts, epidemiologists or doctors and economists who are speaking. A good amount of this data is also being fielded by journalists, officials, politicians, social activists. Everybody is citing data. So one can even say that there is just a surfeit. People call it dataphilia, data fetish, explosion of data. And it's not just data, you also find that there's a lot of narratives and stories being presented, especially in a crisis like this. So you have personal touch with the people who are speaking. So all this raises a question that if so many people are looking at data and presenting narratives, what does the social researcher do? Is the social researcher any different from the journalist or the official or the other people who are also citing data and talking about them? In what way is our role different? And it is here that I want to draw your attention to a couple of points about data itself and the perspective of a social researcher vis-a-vis those of the others whom I just mentioned. So if you look at this about the data itself, we have to distinguish between data, information on the one hand, and knowledge on the other. Because it's one thing to have a lot of information, but the knowledge consists in coherently choosing a set of information, verifying them, and then linking them to assumptions and systematically pursuing them. I'll come to it very soon. So a distinction between information and knowledge has to be made. And another very important point for us as social researchers is that data is not a piece of neutral information out there. Often when we use official statistics or crime statistics or health statistics or various kinds of numbers, you find that the statistic itself is generated by an act of human judgment of collection. Who records the statistics? How they decide that something is a death by cost? Is it a suicide, or is it caused by natural causes, or is it an accident? Even today in the COVID crisis, you find that it's very difficult for them to place whether it's a death caused by COVID or by other conditions, or they are related. It's very difficult. It's not a straightforward thing out there. So generating data, recording them, and collation of data itself is an act involving human judgment, and it's possible to have errors, biases, and omissions in this process. So there are very interesting accounts of the process of generating data itself. A very renowned sociologist called Garfinkel. What he did was he went and studied how coroners in the US decide whether something is a suicide, or is it an accident, or it's caused by natural causes. So, and he found this study was conducted in the 60s, but it's widely cited because he found that coroners who have legal background, they often use commonsensical criteria to decide whether something was a death by natural cause or it's a suicide. There's a lot of ambiguity there, even though they have a stringent definition of what constitutes suicide, whether a particular case is a suicide or not, whether somebody is BPL or not. These decisions are decisions of human judgment. And a lot of people use common sense, whether something constitutes a rape or not. These are all very difficult decisions, and often common sense criterion is used. And therefore, the very generation of data is ridden with issues. So it's not a neutral, an objective thing out there which we can immediately assume and use. Another very important thing I want to flag here is the fact that official statistics, they often ignore statistically and politically insignificant things. See, statistics and averages also, they need a minimum number, and only politically important or statistically very significant numbers tend to be highlighted. But as researchers, we know we can't afford to do that. Something may not be statistically significant, or something may not be very centrally politically very important, but it is still some thing unfolding, and it has a lot of potential for social research. Let me give you an example. See, there's you must have heard about clinical trials. In clinical trials, what happens is that you have a control group and an experimental group, and the drugs are administered to the experimental group. And what happens is that the control group receives what is known as a placebo, or it's just an inert sugar-coated pill. It's not the medicine. And the experimental group receives the medicine. Now, normally, and if the experimental groups, their health and condition improve, then we consider that the drug has been validated. There are parameters. Sometimes people in the control group who receive a placebo also improve. Now, nobody pays attention to them. Nobody looks at that. But there's a beautiful anthropological study by Moorman who looked at the placebo group. Why is it if 80% of the people in the experimental group are improving with the drug, some 40% in the control group are also improving. Their results are very good as those who are receiving the drug. No, they are not taken seriously by others, but the anthropologists and sociologists go and look at them. What makes these 40% or 50% who just receive a placebo also to get better from a chronic or an acute illness? So this is, I want to highlight to you, because we cannot go by what mainstream science, statistics, or politics throws up as important problem. Another very important thing in this regard, example I can give you in this regard, is the fact, now if you look at studies of rag pickers, normally they are classified as informal sectors. Today we call them migrant labor, or whatever. But if you actually go there and look at the way the rag pickers are organized, there is a very clear, they're quite organized. They are also regulated. There are many internal distinctions. So you have those who deal with kura and the others who deal with kachra. They are not the same. The people who come in the cycle and collect dry garbage, they are different. Garbage are different from those who collect wet garbage, and they have two different cycles or networks of people to whom they report. So the amount of money and the number of people involved in rag picking is so huge, and they are so, though they are insignificant, they are poor, we call them migrant labor, they are underpaid and so on. We have to realize that if India is among the top 2 or 3 countries which recycles garbage to the highest extent, more than any other country, then it is because of these people. These are the people who because of whom India has earned the credit of being among the few countries. I think we are able to recycle something above 60 to 65% of the garbage, including plastic. So there's a beautiful work called Poverty and Plastic by Kaveri Gill, which talks about this. And it is based not just on statistics or political or economic significance of a group, but it is based on an actual qualitative and face-to-face study. So that is why we cannot go only by data. Secondly, another point I wanted to highlight is that our perspective as social researchers is markedly different from the perspective of administrators, officials, the position taken by the state or the government. We may even be evaluating a government policy, but our position is different. The reason is when the state looks at citizens, it has a certain classification. It is interested in certain behaviors because it has to formulate policy, and the state has a particular viewpoint, and it is interested more in arriving at quick classifications so that it can implement its policies. So they have categories like below poverty line people, you have district boundaries, various things which the state has issued. As social researchers, we cannot uncritically adopt the same categories of the state. Even if you are doing a study of people below the poverty line, we cannot say we should engage with what is this poverty line. If there are few families who don't qualify below poverty line, but they have similar experiences, will you exclude them from your study? In fact, you should look at how the threshold works. So therefore, administrative viewpoint or the administrative purposes are very different. They are also quickly for evolving policy. They are classificatory in nature. They want to classify things to be able to arrive at some policy. And the best example is what's reported today in the newspaper, that in the GST regime, there is now what is taxable, what is not taxable depends on which category it comes on. So now there is a big discussion on whether paratha and roti come under the same category. If it is readily packed, it goes under goes into higher tax slab. So whether papad is same as chips, they have whether biscuit and chocolate. So whether Kit Kat is a biscuit or a chocolate. So these kind of debates are happening because there is a classificatory regime of what is the tax slab. So the government's purpose is different. But if you are going and studying food and nutrition, you can't adopt the same classifications. You have to look at what's happening on the ground, and as a social researcher, develop your own classifications. And we should not, even when we are dealing with infant mortality or poverty, we can work with government categories, but we should not uncritically adopt in our research categories like BPL or district boundaries as given by the government. They are only district boundaries. Beyond two districts, the social life may be the same. Or so that should not be the criterion with which we work, because state approach does not reflect the social dynamics and experience, which is what we look at as sociologists. A very powerful example of the difference between the way state and social research looks at something is the study about the Bhopal Gas Tragedy. This is especially important because we encounter so many industrial accidents today. You saw the one in Visakhapatnam, now in Assam, the Indian Oil, there's a big fire, people have died. Now, if you look at such things as the Bhopal gas tragedy, one of the biggest industrial accidents, a very big issue in giving compensation to the sufferers, the people who were affected, is to decide how much they suffered or how much they were affected. Now, in this, who decides this? A doctor or an expert team decides this. The experience of the people or the claims made by the people about their suffering have no validity. So sociologists like Veena Das and anthropologists like Arthur Kleinman, they have a very good book called Social Suffering, in which they point out they've gone and taken people's narratives and of suffering, and then they see how someone who's been crippled or has lifelong experience of pain, but since it doesn't get covered in the X-ray, that person is not entitled to compensation. So what happens is the viewpoint of the social in this network or triadic relationship between state, science, and society. The social researcher cannot either adopt the perspective of state, science, society, or the market, but we will have to see, we have to look at everything and see what the dynamics are. So this similarly journalistic. I told you that a lot of journalists are looking at these issues, but the journalistic interests are short-lived. Sometimes they amount to sensationalizing a particular issue. They may not pursue something through time, whereas social research is systematic, and the idea is to pursue the issue over a period of time. And what is more important, I mean, before I close this topic on data versus knowledge, which we started, is the question that sensory inputs and visual images, such as what you see in terms of videos, what you hear, podcasts, a lot of data and visual figures, they alone don't constitute a knowledge of the social world. They are inadequate. You need thinking, you need intellectual engagement, and you have to compare this with other prior work that has been completed to be able to take it to the level of social research. So what social research intends to do should be focused on while choosing the research problem and asking research questions is often we may be focusing on what is insignificant, what is not very visible, what's not very popular, some very ordinary day-to-day thing. It could very much be part of, those are the kind of things that you should look at in social research. So much so Bourdieu says that actually what you do is you tend to exoticize the ordinary day-to-day things which people take for granted in their everyday life. You can exoticize, or you focus on it, develop a research question, and you pay attention to it. Then you realize how much more to it there is. Similarly, sometimes something very dramatic and very popular, you might go and look at the less observed parts of it, and you can come out with very good insights. As an example, I can give you the work of laboratory life of Latu, where he is going and studying laboratory, a neuroendocrinologist, endocrinology lab, and which eventually won the Nobel Prize. The scientists there won the Nobel Prize, but he tried to understand that in terms of the daily activities of the lab and how the scientific fact was constructed or built. And it's a very interesting piece of study. So social research is a systematic and long-standing engagement with social phenomena using theoretical tools and comparative methods. And it is here that we understand the centrality of research questions. There's a huge array of data, so much is being put in front of us. What makes the data knowledge? Where do we move into the realm of knowledge is based on the kind of research questions that we ask. What do we postulate? And the research questions help locate the given research between, a larger theory or the context and the given situation. So before I actually go into the research questions and the research problem, I also want to very clearly state something that when our understanding of method and or methodology should not be as something that is standalone. Methods or methodology are not standalone things in research, especially in social research, because the methods you choose and the methodology and the techniques you engage are actually linked to the basic theoretical assumptions of your research. So it's not that you go and randomly pick any research method and tool and start working. It depends on what assumptions we have, whether we thought about it or not. We have to think about it. And it's based on our theoretical assumptions. For instance, if you are employing the survey as a tool and you are going and seeking opinion on a particular thing, it means you have already assumed that individuals are independent units. They hold opinions in their heads, viewpoints, which you are going to tap through the survey. And generally, you're focusing more on viewpoint and opinion, not on action. Because in the survey, you can only ask, did you do something? But you can never observe whether that particular thing was done. So, but the moment you adopt survey as a method of your study, it means you are accepting all these assumptions that the viewpoint is in the individual's head and they are not interested in action. You're more interested only in the viewpoint, and the viewpoint is in the individual out of no other influence. It's the person has arrived at it independently. So research methods is not separate or totally different from the kind of theoretical assumptions you have, and we have to be very articulate about it. In fact, Norman Denson, he poses a very interesting question. Let's say there are two researchers from the same discipline and who are presented with the same situation. Two social psychologists, two sociologists, or to political scientists. Let's say you're studying a mental hospital ward. The two social psychologists, do you think that both of them will arrive at the same kind of conclusions about the ward? Not likely, maybe not. They will, even two researchers from the same discipline studying the same situation could arrive at slightly different conclusions. The reason for this is that the kind of methods they use and the approach they adopt depends on the kind of assumptions they have about the mental hospital. Someone may look only at the documents of admission and discharge and rehabilitation and arrive at a statistical way of looking at it. The other person may elicit narratives, the other person may just observe, and then you may come to slightly different conclusions about the same thing. So all this is to say how the choice of method depends on the theoretical framework adapted, and that is why we need to we talk about triangulation of methods, that you use more than one method. A very good example of this kind of debate is the debate among the economists as to why in India, despite several years of economic growth, which has been quite spectacular earlier, malnutrition is growing. It's not reducing. Under 5 mortality is very high. Malnourishment, weight, underweight, and anemia are very high among women, children, and also among men. Why is this despite increasing income this happening? And there are same set of data is interpreted by different people, different economists from different theoretical backgrounds, neoliberal, Marxist, centrist, and then they arrive at very different conclusions. They use slightly different parameters because it depends on their perspective. So that is why theory and methods are connected. And also research is an act of interaction between the researcher and the research. But unlike day-to-day interaction of every day, research interactions are carefully defined and they are monitored. There is an element of self-conscious planning. You know, you take a couple of decisions, but you very carefully think why you took that decisions. Here I want to share with you something that Harold Winkle would say about the way how we operate, our interactions happen in day-to-day life, and how it has to be in research. See, we use as ordinary people in the world, we use several terms and concepts. We also use abstractions and so on. And there are so many conversations in which we use concepts. But the social science use of concepts are different from everyday day-to-day use of commonsensical use of concepts. The reason is commonsensical concepts could be vague, they are open-ended, they are understood in terms of context. You don't need to spell out each and everything, whereas this is not the case in social science. You cannot take anything for granted. You have to spell out every connotation of the concept. So here is a very, I will quickly read out to you a very interesting anecdote from Garfinkel's book, where he urged, it's a conversation between the husband and wife, where the wife is the experimenter, whom Garfinkel, he said, you talk to the other person. No, it's which says, where this is the conversation. So on Friday night, my husband and I were watching television. My husband remarked that he was tired. I asked, how are you tired? Physically, mentally, or just bored? Answer, I don't know. I guess physically mainly. You mean that your muscles ache or your bones? I guess so. Don't be technical. So if you go on probing into the question, what is, are you tired physically, mentally? Is it that your muscles ache or your bones? And so if, then in social research, you do such kinds of probing because you need the exact meaning of what somebody says when they are, say, tired or sick. Whereas in day-to-day life and conversations, it is understood in context. And when you see in face-to-face interaction, you can make out. So if you behave like a researcher in daily life, you may irritate a lot of people because you ask many probing questions, but you have to do that as a researcher when you are in the field. So so like these are many examples in Garfinkel about everyday interactions and scientific research, social research. So given the fact that so in social research, we are very carefully defining the research problem. We try to be very clear about the concepts. And so this brings us to the question of what is a research problem and how do you ask research questions. Here I'll be using some slides. And so I will switch on the slides and then proceed with this lecture. But I also wanted to share something very important, namely that the research design or the research process is not a linear one. It's not that you've first formulated the problem, you designed the research, chose the methods and finished, done with it, and it's a linear process. What happens is there's a lot of back and forth. You kind of revisit, you go back, and later processes throw light on what you earlier decided. Your fieldwork may reveal what you initially held is not correct. You may have to modify a bit. So it should never be seen as a linear process. It's a process with a lot of back and forth. Therefore, when we start with a precise formulation. So now I will share the screen. I hope this is visible. So the significance of research. Yes. And this. Okay. Now let me see. So we've already talked about the many folds of social investigation today. So how do we distinguish social research is by the kind of questions we ask. And we have to answer the questions meaningfully and self-consciously, for which we need a backup understanding of the social world and human action that comes from theories and concepts. Now, what are to give you a very simple idea, what are the questions, what are the kind of questions we ask when we encounter a particular phenomenon or when you are formulating questions? There are many kinds of questions. Ramakrishna Mukherjee gives a very simple format and it's easier to start with this. He says, when you want to formulate your question, you ask, what is it? What it is out there that I'm seeing? Is it a religious ritual? Is it a particular practice? It's a particular laboratory experiment. What it is? What questions? They are mostly descriptive in nature. The second set of questions are, how is it or how it is? Means, how is it organized? What kind of classification is there? What are the internal articulations? What are the relationships? So you are looking at a local weekly market. You want to see how the traders are organized. What is the profit? Where is the capital coming from them? How do you classify them on the basis of these various activities? And third set of questions is, why is it? Why? Explain it, giving causal explanations. And therefore you have to see why the amount of capital the weekly market has, it has, where, and so on and so forth. So you explain what and how. And he also says, Ramakrishna Mukherjee, that you might consider thinking about predicting what it would be if you have enough data. So to put it simply, we have what, how, why, and what it would be. These look simple, but they have, it's a good thing to start with. Now, let's go through the process of looking at formulating a research problem to asking research questions. There is a lot of work in between identifying a problem and going into research questions. So we choose a research problem for study. It could be an issue in daily life. It could be a problem that bothers you. Child trafficking, corruption, poverty, riots, rape, untouchability. Sometimes you also want to look at things that strike you most, things that are very good, as for instance, how people voluntarily take on social responsibilities. You know, at this time of COVID crisis, a lot of social initiatives, youngsters, poor people, a girl donated several lakhs of her father's savings kept for her education. So it might interest you to see why people do what they do. Sometimes you just want to map a trend, privatization of medical care, intergenerational use of leisure time, how old and young people use leisure time. You want to look at enrollment in higher education. So you're mapping a trend over a period of time. But in all these, it's not enough to say that I'm going to work on privatization of medical care. You have to say something about the scale of the problem, how big it is. Often you have to juxtapose it with other problems. You have to show public sector and private sector to be able to show the growth of private sector in medical care. You have to show the magnitude. You can either show the figures or you can show its influence anecdotally or carefully in terms of a particular case study, or you look at the depth or intensity of the problem. But so it's not enough when you state a problem to say, I'm going to study this problem, but you should also be able to say something about the scale, magnitude, depth, and or intensity. So in short, you will ask, what is it, how it happens, and why it happens. Another set of problem formation could be that you choose a conceptual problem from your book, from your discipline, such as, for instance, in sociology, you can ask, how far are scientific endeavors governed by economic agendas? How far, you can ask how far the search for vaccine is also driven by the pharma industry, scientific endeavors and economic agendas. There are theories about this, and then they could be tested in a particular case. Questions like, is it possible for religious values to propel profit-oriented economic behavior? So particular religious groups, are they more into economic activity? Do their religious values, such as, for instance, Protestantism that Max Weber spoke about, there are also very interesting studies on the role of Buddhism and social initiatives. So what is the role of religious values in economic activity? What kind of values promote profit-oriented behavior? We know that in India, we have many communities, many Jain money lenders, and so on. So there is a certain connection between religious values and economic behavior. Similarly, cultural capital, how does it impact learning outcomes? Is relative deprivation more a cause for unrest than absolute deprivation? So you can ask such questions and find a suitable site and time frame to verify such pre-existing theoretical statements. They are already there, so there are theories about them. You can verify this in the context that you are looking at, your particular case. You want to see if the theory applies to it. Thirdly, sometimes you may not have a question, but you are very interested in a particular place, such as a fish market, how dealings are done, a liquor shop, a hospital, a classroom, courtroom, clinic, laboratory, any of these, and you are very keen in exploring what's happening there. Sometimes it's a particular group, like a tribal community, a transgender group, or you look at online marriage practices, ethical values, or economic activities. In all these, you choose a site, but you ask what, how, and why questions if you have to convert the problem into a problematic. Another very important way of formulating a problem is to locate an anomaly. Don't think that if there's a contradiction, you should be worried. Sometimes contradiction in data or different data sources can itself pose a question for research, and anomalies in existing data can indicate it's a sign of some more deeper problem that needs to be researched. So you can juxtapose or compare two things and say why this is happening. Why is it small farmers in one area commit suicide while it is not happening in certain other areas? Why is it that studies find that the rich people who have good health parameters, they report more health problems than the poor who say they are always fine? So you similarly, you have a paradox why states that have increasing education of women are also the same states where domestic violence is increasing. So how do you explain this anomaly? One can go and study, and often in many of these problem formulations, it's helpful to have a comparative reasoning so that you have analytical strength to arrive at good research questions. So from a wide range of problems, you arrive at what is known as a problematic, because the research problem is not out there ready-made. Yes, you have child trafficking or untouchability or rape, but it is there, but that alone is not enough. We've seen you have to ask certain questions and what you do with that problem. But when you are going to undertake research and you define it as a problematic, you designate a unit of the social reality to act upon. The social reality is an interconnected web. Many things are connected to each other in that problem. And it may be very difficult for a researcher to be able to handle the entire thing. So you have to delineate and you designate that I'm going to focus on this aspect of the social reality, and you define the objects of the study. Why you chose these aspects over others also, it should be very self-consciously explained. You cannot just say, I did this. That is why I said in the beginning that research is a self-conscious process. So you on the part of the researcher, and so you have to define those aspects of the problem you would like to focus on. Very often, you and I know that convenience is a reason why we choose a particular aspect of a problem or a particular site of study. It's okay to for it to be a factor, but we have to acknowledge it. We should not try to hide it and deal with it properly. Yes, you chose a particular problem for the sake of convenience. You have some contacts and so on, but bring that factor into the definition and try and see how you can augment the analytical value of that choice. Something that's very critical to problematizing the is reading, thinking, and writing, because developing a research problem and asking good research questions, or what I call as problematizing, it's an art. It's very difficult to reproduce it. It's not that you read the book and learn it, or you learn it in the classroom. It's a particular mental capacity that is in between the books, your observation of the world, and your ability to think about it. But it is not fully in any of this. You won't get the ready-made problem from the books. You can't just go to the world out there, empirically observe something, and without thinking uncritically. You can't do that. So it's a mixture of the three, and it has to happen through your endeavor. So the first and very important step is reading. It's extremely crucial to research. There should be a lot of reading of different kinds of related texts. Then it's not enough if we read. You have to observe the world and check whether what is said there makes sense in this given context. Why, if not, why does it not make sense? Why is there an anomaly? Why is it this doesn't pan out so clearly? So you have to observe and think about it and probe in order to form the research question. And sometimes in fact more often, intuition, that is, for formulating good questions you need a good intuition, and this intuition is neither in the sensory or the intellectual. I mean, in the sense that just by observing many things and your sensory inputs coming from hearing and observing things, or just by reading books, you will not get it. It's a optimal combination of both, then, which gives you to a good intuition. So you should also allow your intuitive and creative powers to play a role. If you don't understand a text, it's not that it's your problem. Sometimes it's because it could happen because you have to assess the text in terms of what you observe constantly, whether what is said there makes sense in terms of your own experience and observations, and then it gives you greater insight. An interesting suggestion comes from the sociologist George Simmel. He says that if you're a student who wants to understand the psychology behind mass crimes, you should actually also study the psychology of theater audiences. If you're a student of religion, don't go and study only in religious places. Look at the labor unions and look at the religious devotional behavior there. If you're a student of political history, you should also go and study history of art. The point here is that deeper knowledge and understanding is gained in a field of knowledge that is different from the field of investigation. It's not that you have to understand, if you want to understand the psychology behind mass behavior, whether then you must look at related or different fields to see how mass behavior occurs. So that is a good way of gaining insights. So it's the insight doesn't lie in one particular situation. So you can look at the literature in the related fields and see how the dynamics is. See, another thing that many scholars face in the Indian context, in many parts of the world, is the problem of language. Language and linguistic ability is so critical to our thinking. And so language skills, if they are not very strong, then we suffer. We are not able to understand the text or be able to write what we have in our mind. In my understanding, in my experience, I've found that students, even if their felicity with the English language is not very great, if they are conversant in their own language, any one language, which whether it's a mother tongue or the language in which they have acquired later, but if they are able to read, write, and access the literature, they're able to read and enjoy literature and poetry in any language, their ability to think and imagine is better than students, many people who never know fully any particular language. You know, today we speak so much, we are in a mixed hybridized language, that it is neither our own language or is it English. It's an in between of everything. We have neither read the literature in English nor in our own language. And also things like WhatsApp and all have added to this woe of writing brief and grammatically and linguistically wrong sentences. So the it's even if somebody is not very comfortable with English, knowledge of literature in your own language is also good, because literature opens our mind, it improves our imagination, and it infuses abstract thinking. So there should be one language in which somebody is very well grounded, and then you can think in that language, work, it still gives you better ability, and then it's not difficult to learn and work with English. The problem is only when we are not comfortable with any language and we always use hybrid languages, then we have a problem in imagination and reasoning. So you must read a lot of literature as well to be able to formulate a good research question. See, the purpose of research is very important in formulating the research question. You have to know what you're trying to do. Yours might be an explorative study, or it might be descriptive study. You study what is there, and what will you call it, how to name it, how to classify it, etc. Or it's what is called a naturalistic inquiry by certain schools in social science. Naturalistic means you go and observe things as they happen. You go and elicit the participants' experience and narratives of the concept. You don't predefine the variables, but you explore how meanings are emerging in naturalistic settings, how people behave in a religious place, what are the meanings this whole ritual holds for them. So that kind of interpretative studies are possible. So then if you are interested in statistical averages, you look at covariation, or you study association between variables. And sometimes you are exploring a causal relationship, whether one variable has caused the other, then our aim is exploratory. And very often we also engage in evaluating the performance of projects and policies, assessment, evaluatory studies, and the change brought about by an intervention. So we call them assessment or evaluatory studies. So it's very important to be very clear on what the purpose and the nature of the study is, whether it is a description or explanation or an interpretation, or what is it that we are trying to do. Now, you must have heard about inductive and deductive research, but what is interesting for us is when you have a case and you start with empirical observations or the situation at hand, and then you build your study on it, then you explore, you displace, you give alternative explanations, and new insights are possible. In short, an inductive study is where you start with your object of research and then study it very carefully and then develop concepts. Or you may later try and explain it with existing books and concepts. On the other hand, deductive research is where there is an existing theory. You want to test or verify a hypothesis or a statement from an existing theory. Your aim is to validate, modify, or qualify existing theories. Ramkrishna Mukherjee, a renowned sociologist, suggested that in India, you should opt for more of inductive studies because existing theoretical propositions may not fully match the kind of complicated developments here. So you should start with inductive study and then try and, you can use concepts to explain the data at hand. In actual practice, we do a bit of both. Now, this brings us to the role, what is theory? and how important it is to asking good research questions. Now, theories are models of the world, and they are based on selective and pronounced features identified by the theorists, whether they are organic or physical. Different models are there. So you have to selected features are identified. You have some social theories which invoke the biological organism and imagine society to be like an organism, or you have theories of the French thinkers which give the image of a field, gravitational field, or physical metaphors from physics. But the long and short of it is they are a certain model of the social world, and they have been developed based on certain selected and pronounced features of the social world. So, and the theories, previous research, and what is the role and importance of theories is that uh, as an individual, your level of intellect, your ability to know something about the given problem is limited. But when you draw upon theories, you know how the same thing has occurred somewhere else, how human, what are the frequently found elements of human behavior and relationships. So it helps you go beyond the limitations of your individual position. But theories also make certain assumptions about the social world or human nature. So you cannot just draw any theory. We have to connect to certain theories which also match the kind of assumptions or our beliefs about the social world. I have developed this table based on direct ladder work on strategies, new strategies for research, which is again drawn from the school of critical realism. But the long and short of it, very put very simply, is look at the extreme left column, this one, where we talk about level, macro, and meso. Basically, one thing when you have to be cautious or think about when you formulate the research question is at which level, what is it, um, uh, which level are you pitching your study? Are you interested at the level of self? Then you might be looking at individual lives, identity building. You might be tapping biographic and other sources if you are looking at historical figures. Then, or in psychiatric social work or social work, they look at case studies. So you have those kind of studies where it's the self that is being focused on. Sometimes you look at career graphs of women scientists. So if whether your study is pitched at the level of self or at a higher level, it is situated activity. That means you're not looking at individuals and their lives, but you're looking at interactions. And their interactions between people happen in particular environment. There is a material environment. It happens in a room, it's a clinic, or in the open, or in the mountainside. There are objects there, there are technologies. Increasingly, we talk about them as actants. They also play a very important role. And I'll give you a very nice example about this towards the end of this lecture. But what is this? If your study is located not at the level of the individual, you are looking at situated activity, interactions between people. So let's say somebody is studying online matrimonial portals. How, or you can do a very good study of how people present themselves in the social media, what kind of interactions happen, what language is permitted on media, social media like Facebook, various, you use certain language. So you can look at these aspects of the interaction. You can look at local weekly markets. You look at a board meeting of a company. You look at a courtroom. You may also follow specific objects like genetically modified seeds. What is their history? And how the decision to adopt them or not adopt them is made in certain meetings. So this is at the level of situated activity, but you may also enlarge the context. You want to study something bigger, something like a setting, is that then it's an intermediate environment between the situated activity, the individual, and the larger trends. So here you look at an organization, you look at a social movement, you look at villages, or you look at neighborhoods or larger collectivities. So neighborhood gangs, or you're studying a mental asylum, you look at a particular organization and look at work culture there. These studies are located at an intermediary level. It's meso, as we call them. These two are called social environments. The setting is meso, which is in between, and then this one is macro, where you are looking at trends and patterns. And this is you may be looking at opinions or attitudes or behavior or of large sections of people, big samples in a particular city or in a particular field. Sometimes you look at transformation. You have studies how a particular region has transformed over the years. So these are all trend analysis and pattern analysis that, and here the unit of analysis that's been focused upon is something that is widely and collectively found. So studies of voting behavior, health behavior, attitude to authoritarianism, what are the patterns of honor killing or gender stereotypes you might be eliciting opinions. So this table tells you, indicates to you that you must be clear in your mind at which level is your study located. Is it a macro level, meso, or a micro level? And then see what are your units of analysis. So, and some theories, given theories, they have a very typical, a unit of analysis. If you have already decided that you are using a particular theory, then different theories have specific concepts. You can recognize a theory by its concept. They are so typical of the theory. The moment you see a particular concept, you realize it's coming from a particular theory. So, and certain theoretical frameworks designate that you can focus, this will be the unit of analysis if you adopt that theory. So there's a school called Sociological Phenomenology, which is more interested in looking at individual actors in situations and how they make sense of the world. And here the very often, the most commonly used concept is lived experience. How does it mean? What is the lived experience of poverty? What is the lived experience of a particular religious ritual? What does it mean to have a spiritual experience? So those are the kind of things this school of thought focuses on. And so the moment you see lived experience, you should think that, okay, it comes from this particular school. And you cannot do a macro study in phenomenology, because by its very definition and assumptions, it is based among the micro or meso levels. So there is a connection between the theory you use and the units of analysis of the study. You cannot say, I'll do a phenomenological study and then I'm adopting principles of phenomenology, and then say I'll do a survey in this fashion. It's not possible. Lived experience can be captured only through, often through narratives. So a particular theory and unit of analysis and the method, they are tied together. Similarly, if you look at this approach called social analysis, it looks, it thinks of society as a field. It's like something like a gravitational field in which things are related, they attract or repel each other, in which actors are playing in something like a game in based on the kind of strengths and capital that they have. It's a power game. So whether it is a day-to-day interaction, a field within the household, there's a power game, or whether you are talking about a boardroom or the field of sports, anything this could be conceptualized as a field consisting of actors. And so actors have social capital, they have economic capital and symbolic capital, which they use to play these games in their life. So the moment you see the term social capital, you can see it is coming from the school of social analysis, often associated with the French thinker Bourdieu. Similarly, if there is, in the Indian context, I want to share with you that this a culturological approach, which Yogendra Singh talks about. When you are interested in understanding the self, whether it is individual or collective, the politics between the inner self and outer self, and how individuals They try to balance their image outside with what is going on inside them. This is known as the politics of self, and people like Ashish Nandi have made brilliant use of this in understanding civilization and culture. So if you see the word politics of the self, you will understand that it is coming from this particular approach. So concepts and the conceptual frame is very important. And what is a concept is that it's an image of reality. It designates and suggests a plan to know it. That means the, when you use a particular concept like capabilities or women's empowerment or work-life balance, like somebody had submitted an abstract. Now, some concepts have empirical reference. And then, so if you want to study work-life balance, there is a certain way of ascertaining it. So there's a plan of action how to go and study it. Amartya Sen spoke about human capabilities, education, wealth, and other things, and also as to how you go and understand that. But not all concepts have empirical reference. Some concepts are very abstract, and concepts cannot be directly observed. They have to be inferred from symbols, language, or because they may not take the form of behavior. So some concept like underachievement, it's not that it is written on somebody's face that there is underachievement, but you infer it from behavior and you set up certain parameters. You say empowerment, but actually the women concerned may not feel that they are empowered. You may think it's happening. So what are the parameters by which you judge whether empowerment has occurred, whether it is there? Human development, individualism, have individualistic values taken root among the youth today? Now, so individualism is a concept. It's not that there's one behavior by which you can identify it. You have to correlate it with various kinds of language, embodied gestures and behavior and opinions and values to be able to arrive at whether this particular concept is found among people. Now, due to want of time, I'm skipping the details of this particular slide. But the idea behind the slide is to tell you that scholars like Goffman, when he took the concept of stigma, how do you understand a concept? If the concept is already there in a particular theory and it's being used in texts, different texts, like for instance, stigma, now Goffman, he went and studied numerous books and articles, and he saw the various contexts and circumstances in which the concept of stigma has been used, how has it been studied, and he collated them together, and he found that stigma, which is meaning leading to rejection or restrained interaction, actually happens because there are certain attributes that are discredited, leading to rejection. They could be race, ethnicity, or religion. It could be based on physical characteristics or blemishes of character. And so he arrived at this understanding of stigma after going through various studies and after taking note of different circumstances in which the concept of stigma has been used. So this is how you improve the clarity of concepts. You locate and define them in your own research after reading how they have been used elsewhere. Even if you're in a discipline like psychology, which uses standardized tools, you want to study something like well-being, or you want to study work and life balance, we should ensure that we simply do not adapt the tool which has been developed elsewhere. We should be able to enhance the depth and range of our understanding through pilot studies and pre-testing. So coming to research questions, just we know after you identified the problem, you are asking questions, what, how, and why, and what will it be? And then you have looked at the concepts, the theoretical framework, you have identified the levels of analysis. So you're framing the research questions. A lot of process has already happened. And you see the research questions are in between theory and the given research. They reflect the creativity and conceptual strength of the research. Um, so I've given this example, but I'll move. I would like to give an example from the abstract of one of the participants. So basically, one very important point is that research questions are very different from the questions you pose in the questionnaire. The questions you pose in the questionnaire are meant for your informants. They are a set of operations. The research question is an academic endeavor. It comes from your discipline and it's based on your knowledge of the subject. And this is something that you share with your professional peers as to, and you arrive at through a conceptual study. Now, for instance, I did see an abstract from one of the participants. I thought I'll just show it as an example. Impact of education and Christianity on traditional political institutions among communities in Nagaland. So if you are formulating research questions to understand how education and Christianity has impacted political institutions among two different communities, then you have to first look at traditional political institutions, which itself is a concept, and impact. What do you mean by impact? What counts as impact? What do you mean by education? So all these become concepts which has to be very clearly articulated what you mean by them. Second, whether by traditional political institutions you are taking the participants' view, or you are going to define a political institution based on certain external characteristics. And then you ask questions about when school education starts, when conversion to Christianity. So there's an element of social history there. You can't leave it. Which aspects have altered? And then you have to discuss whether the political institutions have altered in mode of constitution, jurisdiction, decision making, interaction, whether there are shadow institutions, means they are not official, but there is a shadow political institution. The traditional political institutions continue to function as shadow institutions even after the arrival of modern Panchayati Raj institutions. So then gender, inclusion, and so on. And then you do a comparison. You should also keep in mind different perspectives. There are different interest groups here. They may have a different view about the impact or about whether the institution in question is in fact political or not. So all these have to be featured and asked as research questions. Research questions, another important step here is arriving at operational definition of concepts. We may be using concepts, but at the time of formulating objectives, we have to give operational definitions of concepts. So you are of variables. So if you say you're going to look at socioeconomic status and decision making when somebody is ill as to what therapy is to take, then you have to operationalize socioeconomic status. Socioeconomic status can include a whole range of attributes. It can mean inherited wealth, can mean income, it can mean education, it can mean caste and community status, the region where you come, city or village. So you have among the wide range of variables that can attributes that can be associated with socio-economic status, you have to identify what is relevant for your study. So in this case, you may identify income and education. Then you specify the indicators, whether what income, individual income or family income, how are you going to measure the education level, then you choose which last class study and so on. So in the case of qualitative studies, then the process goes slightly differently. You have to develop the indicators after collecting the data. What the research design, coming to the research design itself, generally the process is slightly different when your study is entirely quantitative. A lot of time and application is required in conceptualizing and operationalizing your concepts. Then you construct a research design methods, you collect data, but in such quantitative surveys, After data collection, classification and tabulation is relatively easy because a lot of work has been done in the beginning in the conceptualization stage. In contrast, in interpretative approach, you see that you don't you allow, it's a naturalistic inquiry, you want the field to present its features, so you design some methods, you have some research questions, but you don't stringently delimit the concepts, and then you go and collect data, but then you have in the end a lot of narratives, you have interview material, you have in-depth interviews, so you have to spend a lot of time in content analysis, classification, and then trying to tease out the concepts that are emerging from the view of the participants. So in qualitative research, there is more work after data collection, in the sense more work in conceptualization and explaining after data collection, whereas in quantitative, it is different. I'll skip a few slides for want of time. See, so generally we agree today that we should use more than one method because no one particular tool can give us a good perspective. So I'm sure you all know about triangulation, where you use, you corroborate the results from one particular method by using another method to verify, or you use the principle of complementarity by using two methods to cover a particular different aspects of the same phenomenon, or you use initiation where you discover paradoxes or contradictions and focus on them and sort them out, or development where results of one method confirm the other, or expansion using mixed methods to add breadth and scope of the study. So from the point of starting research questions, and you come to research design where you choose what are the methods you're going to use, and how long you will study, what is the timeline of the study, what is the sample size and other things. These are commonly discussed in many textbooks. But what I wanted to field to you here is you have to have think about reliability, in the sense that whether when the study is repeated, will it bear the same result? In some qualitative studies, the same researcher may not get the same results because after a passage of time, things do make a difference. Only in some experimental studies is this reliability built in. So, but we have other ways, other checks and balance to ensure reliability of the study. And validity, when you're making a causal explanation, one has to check validity. The external validity of a study depends on the generalizability of the study, the generalizability of the causal relation, and the internal validity of the study depends on the relationship between the independent and the dependent variable, what has happened in between, as any intervening factor appeared, whether due to fatigue or maturation of the researcher, there is an effect, whether the testing itself produces an effect, whether selection bias is there, whether experimental mortality, whether certain informants have withered out from the study. All these factors affect the internal validity and they should be considered at the time of the research design. In certain qualitative and interpretative studies, since different observers have different styles of studying and everything cannot be replicated, and there is a passage of time which introduce changes, we have to do reliability tests based on internal consistency of the data, coherence, matching of the details and informations and the sources. In any case, whatever the nature of study, there is no escaping the tests of reliability and validity. So I would like to, conclude, but we need certain metaphors for social research. I mean, what is the role of the social researcher like? In the beginning, I already mentioned that some certain things we do might be like what the journalists are doing today. The certain things we do might be like what the administrators are doing, but still the social researcher has her or his own independent role. But what could be the metaphors today? One, people earlier used to look up to the physical sciences for concepts and techniques. We want to emulate and be precise like the social sciences. On the other hand, interactionist and humanist schools contested this by saying that human beings are not like laboratory objects that are inert and not live, since our informants are also thinking and acting and abstracting, we have to adopt qualitative methods. But today, so this debate between science and art, quantitative, qualitative, etc., is become quite old. Today, you have post-humanist approaches that say that we should adopt different metaphors. Why not think of law? For instance, or think of yourself as a detective, like the detective profession, where you want to understand a particular problem, or where you go and use documentary evidence, plus questioning the witnesses. And as in the case of detective profession, there's also a focused observation. So you avoid this binary between science, physical science, and art, and you can have new models and metaphors in law or in the profession of detectives, or and you can also rely on oral histories and literature to provide very insightful studies. We started by talking about data explosion. So there are some very new and nice initiatives. So there are scholars who argue that you have to counter this dataphilia by producing depth and insight. It is possible to have good insights from minor and small data. So if you are a very perceptive researcher, if you go and study a garbage bin in a particular locality, you want to understand what's happening to the urban area, say Munirka, which is drastically transforming in Delhi, you go and look at the garbage bin and the kind of garbage there, whether it has a lot of company-made products or Kirana store products, what kind of food packets are there. With that, you can guess the age, the class structure of the people living there. It can be just by analyzing the garbage bin in a locality or a neighborhood, or by studying the laundry line in a locality, what kinds of clothes are being dried. You can say a lot about the household, about class, about culture and consumption patterns. And these are the kind of metaphors you should think of today to be able to apply and counter the data philia. One very interesting example is the study of clocking practices. I mentioned to you in the beginning that I will allude to the use of non-human and embedded technologies in our research. So there's a very beautiful study of a classroom and how the behavior of the teachers and how the behavior of the pupils and students is very nicely orchestrated by the simple shift of the clock's hand. So with every period, a new activity and a new way of thinking and working comes into place. Nobody talks about it. Their gaze is on the clock, and automatically the body movements change. So the author says it's an implicit dance of shared rhythm and expectations. And how the clock, by simply looking at a very basic technology like the clock, which you find in every house, every office, and how it moderates, how it alters or orchestrates our behavior. And it's a non-hierarchical intermingling of human and non-human actors. And how, so there are many such embedded technologies, not just the clock, even things like prosthetics, like glasses, then other small technologies which have become part of our day-to-day life. You can study a government office by looking at the clock. You can look at other technologies. You can use a computer. And so these are all very innovative ways of thinking of research problems. You can understand all the conventional things like gender, class, household, work-life participation, or other things by looking at such, focusing on depth rather than extensiveness of data. So what I wish to conclude by saying that asking good research questions itself is a process, and it may not be possible for us to answer all of them in the end, but nevertheless, asking good research questions itself is very important. So I will stop here and wait for questions.
Thank you very much, ma'am. I'm really thankful how you started with data explosion to data versus knowledge, then to research questions, reading, thinking, and writing, the levels of study, the units of analysis, the conceptual framework, the operationalization of the concepts, to the role of social researchers. It was so beautifully explained within a short spell of around 70 odd minutes that me as a researcher has been benefited a lot. As far as a student of sociology is concerned, I've also learned few new things which I probably feel that will help me as a researcher to grow. Now I request Dr. A.M. Saklani ji, Deputy Director, IGNOR Regional Center, Noida, to give his compliments, comments, observations, please. Saklani, sir.
Your lecture has given us rich insights in charting the path of a social researcher. No doubt, as you rightly said, the path of a social researcher is distinct from, say, a journalist or an administrator. How should one approach the data, the value neutrality of the data, or otherwise the choice of methods and their organic closeness with the theoretical assumptions, the formulation of research question and identifying research problem through the intellectual engagement of the researcher in discerning and sifting of data, and identifying the research problem from the wide array of social reality around the researcher. And you've given very nice examples, man. As you rightly said, language is no bar for a researcher, but extensive reading, thinking, imagination, reasoning, and conceptual clarity certainly are very germane to the progress of research. Thank you so very much, ma'am.
I'll be happy to answer questions if any.
Yeah, ma'am. Yeah, sure. Few compliments which have come. First, I'll read them, ma'am. Sujatha Rai, she is from Government College, Darjeeling. Very good morning, ma'am. Thank you very much for your enriching deliberations. Sujatha Rani Rai, Associate Professor, Darjeeling Government College. A question, again, a compliment which has come from Mo Mira Poneng. Probably I have pronounced her name correctly. She says, not a question, but saying thank you, ma'am. While explaining the example of research question on the impact of education and Christianity on traditional institutions, ma'am has guided me how to go about it. She has unknowingly become my webinar supervisor. That's a compliment from the research scholar, Nagaland University. Something on triangulation, ma'am. P.K. Agarwal sir wants to know something on triangulation. What we do in triangulation?
Yes, what is triangulation? Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. See, triangulation is the means that you use more than one method. First, it's a mixed methods approach, and in which you might use a little bit of survey or quantitative data and go and verify it using narratives. I've used it in my own research on nutrition, because if you go, you collect the data, quantitative data on nutrition, birth weight of children, etc., that's available, but one wants to corroborate whether the state or district level data is borne out actually in a given village. So I wanted to cross-check qualitatively whether the quantitative data about nutrition reflected in birth weight, etc., weight of women, is how it is understood by the people out there, whether it is borne out by the village level statistics. So I collected district level statistics, village level statistics, so collects data from different sources and also different methods. You corroborate using narratives. So the triangulation happens when you use different methods and to verify one particular statement or fact or a group of research findings. So whether the extent of malnutrition as given by district level data is also borne out by the village level data. It was a question I was trying to answer, because district level data presents a very dismal picture. So is it the true in the village level? That's what I was trying to do. Triangulation is used widely in mixed method designs, where Nancy Schipper, she did a study of shanty town in Brazil. I should definitely mention this. what she did was she was trying to collect information on child deaths. She knew that there were several child deaths it's a very poor town, but there was no figures forthcoming. So she, while she got certain quantitative data, she wanted to corroborate it. So she went to the coffin maker in the town and found out how many coffins for children were made over a particular point in time. So by this, she was able to corroborate the data on child deaths given by the officials. She found that the number of coffins made by the coffin maker for children in that particular area was very large. So she, through her primary research, she came up with this. So this is what is important as the role of a researcher, that we corroborate the existing data, corroborate quantitative using qualitative, or also the other way around, and also use documentary sources so that you're very sure what you're putting forth is very well verified. So that is called as triangulation. Use at least three different methods on the same kind of statement or a fact.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. I take up next question by Vyoma. Ma'am, we have validity tests to check the authenticity and reliability of quantitative data. But are there any tests for qualitative data?
See, that is one of the questions I mentioned there. In qualitative data, the issue is there is the question of construct validity is there as to whether the concepts that were used in the study, they reflect the viewpoint of the participants. Let's say you're looking at a spiritual experience, you've elicited narratives. Now, whether the narratives of the people, the participants actually reflect the spiritual experience, is that what they reflect? Or do they mean something else by this? What does spirituality mean to them? And is that what you have gone and studied? This is called as construct validity as to whether you are they have understood something else by your question, or whether you are on the same page, whether you have understood. This is known as meaning adequacy at the level of meaning, whether you have adequately captured what spiritual experience means to the participants of that particular group. And you may use the word spirituality, they may have a different meaning or a different domain in which they are practicing. So whether our methods captured what it was intended to capture, this is and the method normally to verify this, we consult other experts to talk to them, other experts who have studied the same thing. You consult other literature, you do pilot studies, you verify with the informants themselves, and other measures of validity and reliability are internal consistency of data, whether the sources and details match. You give one kind of details here about the religious ritual, but it does not match with the kind of statements provided. Either there are contradictions in the informant's own accounts or your understanding of the informant's accounts. So qualitative data that way presents more challenges if you have to build a reliable and valid results. So these kind of internal methods of checking validity within the data and the construct, and consulting with experts and with the participants, because they are in some sense co-producers of that particular narrative, by going back to them, presenting to them, we try to ensure the validity of qualitative data.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Before I ask Dr. Ashok to deliver the vote of thanks, one compliment which I've just got on my WhatsApp is, because I don't know the name, good afternoon, sir. It is an enlightened session by Sujatha ma'am. Learned a lot regarding research problem. May I get her email ID so that I can seek guidance from her in future? Because I don't know the participant. I've got just this message on my WhatsApp, but definitely she must be a research scholar somewhere in any remote part of the country, and she's so encouraged by your lecture on research problem that she is interested in your email ID so that she can get some more guidance from you, ma'am.
Yes, sure. It's available on the university's website.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just, so thank you so much. I actually carefully went through the abstracts that you sent me of the different people, only that I've not used all of them. I saw social media and women's empowerment, very abstract, many abstracts that one could discuss. But I guess I did mention them during the presentation here. But this gave me an idea of the kind of things that the participants are working on. So thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. I request Dr. Ashok to please deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am, you explained firstly data and knowledge very effectively and very simply manner. And as well as you also differentiate between with a great example of clinical research. It maybe you can say experimental research and social sciences researches. It was a great example for us. And then, ma'am, this is also an amazing key how to select the problems. You explain from very different perspectives how can we select the problem as the problem is most important for any research. So research problem. So it was very amazing. I don't want to take more time on behalf of Indira Gandhi National Open University, Regional Center Noida, NAS College Meerut, convener Dr. Sanjeev Mahajan, and all participants. And my on behalf extended the vote of thanks to Professor S. Sujatha. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Again, ma'am, on behalf of IGNOU Regional Center Noida, all the participants, I'm really thankful from the deep core of my heart that you spared some time for us, especially on Sunday. That too on Sunday now today. I know you have a busy schedule, but still you spared some precious time of yours for the participants. I hope that all the participants must have been enriched by your vast knowledge, and I hope that in near future also we'll get some kind of a patronage from you so that our participants, our students can also be benefited.
Surely, and my best wishes to them.
Thank you, and thank you very much. Thank you.